Most leadership programs fail before they start. Why? Because they're seen as a one-off solution to a messy problem. We run a whole lot of people through a leadership program, which looks like a clean solution, but ultimately ends us costing us money. Let me show you what I mean. So we have a leadership program, and so we have a problem. That's point one. So rather than thinking systemically, most organizations immediately go to, okay, so perhaps we need to do some training, some management or some leadership training, which makes good logical sense. People attend the training and are really happy because the training is fantastic. It gave them some new skills and ways of thinking about problems and solutions differently. So inherently, that's a good thing. Then they go back to their system, if you like. And suddenly all of the things or some of the things I learned in the leadership program don't really work because we've sent a good person back to a bad system. And a bad system will always beat a good person. So then we have uh, a lack of results. We don't see tangible change, which costs the organization lots of money. And then the solution is saying as another leadership program or some other intervention, which may or may not work. The problem here is that we're not thinking systemically. Here, we need to think about the organization as a system. And unless we can support people to really think about the organization in a different way, and rather than just roll out training without a huge amount of thought, that it's going to be problematic. I was recently at speaking with a client about a large leadership development program that they were wanting to pursue for a level of leadership. And my colleague and I were asking some questions around what's the scaffolding, apart from what the leadership program, what they wanted to achieve with the program. We said, well, what's the strategy? What's the system? What's the structure? What's the scaffolding? So when people come back into their home roles, if you like, what support mechanisms will be in place? That's the first part. The second part was what all of the things that we need to align around processes, system, structure, etc., to really make this leadership program successful rather than just another training. People have a good time. They may remember some things for some time, put the workbook back in the drawer and may or may not implement. It's not their fault. Maybe it's too hard. Maybe the leadership program was much more about technical skills, or even leadership programs I've seen over 3 decades sometimes or often actually don't really make a fundamental difference because they attack the wrong things. We don't necessarily think about complexity. We don't think about the difference between that and a complicated problem or challenge. We focus very much on the skills which are easy to teach and easy to implement that don't necessarily have an impact in the organization. So we're asking lots of good questions, probably 15 or 20 minutes had gone by. And then one of the L&D professionals said, look, we just want a leadership program. And there it is. It's a convenient package, bring some outside consultants in, deliver the leadership program, and we can tick that box. Is it any wonder that sometimes leadership programs create cynicism and skepticism in those who attend or those who are back in the team when the leader comes back to the team and doesn't see fundamental differences? So there's a whole range of things that we need to do from the micro, which is about building good habits. It's about building the artifacts and the mechanisms into the team. So teaching leaders how to build those in. So even if they forget about some of the learnings from the leadership program, they've built those mechanisms in to their home system, if you like. But then at the macro level, what does the executive team need to do to make leadership something that can be deployed, people can experiment in a safe way, and we can really challenge the system and challenge the boundaries. I really like what Ron Heifetz talks about here. Actually, I might draw this. Wasn't planning on, but let me draw it. So he talks about this is authority, which is given to us by two methods, actually, two things. One is formal, which is our role, and then there's informal authority. And that informal authority, I think, comes from things like credibility, trust, and values. They're the three main things that drive informal authority. So most leadership programs don't teach you about the boundaries of our authority. And in fact, most of them complicit in ensuring that we stay within the boundaries of our informal authority or our formal authority and informal authority. What Heifetz talks about, which I really like, is actually real leadership is actually about going to the boundaries of our authority and testing those boundaries and sometimes going beyond those boundaries. Now, if that's scaring you, you're probably thinking in a very traditional way about organizations and authority and leadership. There is a difference between leadership and authority. We often conflate the two. And is it any wonder that many leadership programs don't work? Authority is what's vested in us in the role. Leadership is what we actually do to be able to move things forward. You know you're leading adaptively. You know you're leading and challenging the status quo when you start hearing the word no or get back in your box, stay in your lane, stay in your runway, which is not useful. So you know you're actually pushing the system, you're provoking the system into a different way of thinking about it. And in fact, adaptive leadership is not about, diagnosis. Most leadership programs talk about we diagnose, we formulate a solution, and then we implement and we celebrate. How we should actually create change and lead change is we diagnose, we experiment or prod the system, we observe what actually happened as a result of my intervention, the meeting, the framing of the question and how I asked it. We observe, then we iterate and we diagnose, then we prod the system and it continues. That's the only way to create meaningful change. I often see in project management offices that suffer from being frozen in time, actually. So they create rigid structures around the solution. You have to do it one way. And then to a certain extent, it does create rigor, but it also creates rigor mortis because that's not how real change leads. Real change is led. So that's my invitation for you to think about how do you lead in a different way? How do you create and roll out leadership programs in a different way, in a more thoughtful way, one which takes the whole system into account and seeks to align things, processes, structure, policy, etc., behind the leadership that you need in the organization. And only then will you be ready to run a really great leadership development program. As we talk about a lot, future ready leadership should satisfy and feed into the strategy. If your leadership and your leaders are not activating the strategy in service of clients, patients, revenue, profitability, et cetera, then it's been a big fat waste of your money and time. If you're interested in having a further conversation, there'll be details in the comments below. Thanks.